Grade 4s, welcome back to our third lesson of Alberta Stories, History, and People. Today we are going to look at the buffalo. Last class we learned about Alberta's First Nations, the different groups that have lived and still live today in Alberta. We look specifically at the Kainai, the Piikani, the Woodland Cree, the Plains Cree, the Dene Saline, and there was a couple other ones. I just can't bring them to mind right now. The Blackfoot, the main groups were the Blackfoot and the Cree, and that is what we're going to continue to learn about. Today we are going to look at the buffalo. The buffalo, I know it sounds weird to just learn about one specific animal, but the buffalo truly had a very significant effect on these First Nations tribes, as it was one of their most important resources. We've learned about Alberta's natural resources already. We've learned about oil, gas, lumber, all of those great natural resources that we have. And today we're going to learn about another one, the buffalo. So let me just get my screen all ready here for you. You should have your booklet ready in front of you on the page that says the buffalo. So I'll pull it up here for you right now. And here we go. So please follow along while I read through this with you. The buffalo. For many people, and especially the Plains people, so the people kind of like where we live right now and down into Lethbridge, hunting buffalo was essential to survival. Also known as bison, the buffalo was very important. Groups of First Nations would follow the herds of buffalo around the land they hunted. As they hunted them. Sorry about that. I'll say that again. It was choppy. Groups of First Nations would follow the herds of buffalo around the land as they hunted them. So remember at the very start, I said that these peoples were nomadic, meaning that they moved from place to place. And one of the animals that they often followed was the buffalo. So big herds of buffalo used to just roam all over Alberta. There were thousands and thousands of them. And these First Nations people would follow the herds so that they could support themselves. When a buffalo was hunted, every single part of the animal was used. So we're going to look at this diagram below and see how the First Nations used these different parts of the buffalo. And some of them are kind of gross, and like we never would have thought of using these parts of the buffalo for certain things, but this is how they lived, and it was actually really genius. Like they were very, very smart to think to use all of these parts of the buffalo for these things. So let's start with skin, the hides. They would skin the buffalo and they would use it to make containers, like bowls. Like they would sew it in a certain way to make a bowl or a container. They would make their clothing from the hides. And you can imagine how cold Alberta winters have gotten. They would have needed really warm fur. And if you look at this little animated picture of the buffalo is covered in fur. So this would have been great for clothing. They would make bags, drums, ropes, cases for their knives, teepee covers, belts, and a lot of other stuff. The skin was very valuable. And they had a lot of it. You could make a lot of things from a buffalo skin. The next one's a little yucky. It's the brain, and they would use brains for tanning hides, so coloring them. The horns on the buffalo, they would use for spoons, cups, ladles, and they would use them on their big headdresses that they would wear. The skull of the buffalo would be used at ceremonies and as part of the altar. Remember, they had an enormous respect for the animals that they hunted. And they didn't hunt them to be mean or because they didn't like the buffalo. They hunted them because the buffalo helped them and basically like helped them survive. So they honored the buffalo in a lot of their ceremonies. So the skull was used for that. Their beard, like the grizzly part of the buffalo's head, was used to decorate weapons. The hairs, like the little hairs, would be used for headdresses, saddle pads, pillows, and ropes. So they'd stuff pillows with the hair. They would braid it to make ropes. The hooves were used to make different glues to stick things together. That's what glue's for. The fat they could use to make soap and different oils for cooking or to put on their skin. The buffalo's muscles were used for sinew, or also known as threads or string for bows. And they could also make jerky out of the muscles, so like bison jerky. And that's really valuable because jerky, like you guys have had beef jerky before, right? Probably. It's like very, very salted meat, and it can last a long, long time. And that would be important because if they weren't able to hunt for a while because of the weather or something that happened, they could eat the jerky and it would last a long time because they wouldn't have had fridges to keep the meat cold. So jerky is something that would last a long time. They would use the bison's bladder to make bags. Their stomach was used to make containers, cups, and pots. The dung or the poop was used for fuel to make fires. And the tail could be used as a fly swatter or a whip. Super weird to think about, but they're so smart to use all these things. And then we've got the heart, the liver, the kidneys, and the tongue were food. There's so much nutrients in all of these pieces of meat. And then the bones of the buffalo would be used for knives, arrowheads, needles, shovels, different games, and scrapers to scrape things like you'd scrape bark off of trees and stuff like that. So although it might sound a little weird and gross to us, the buffalo was hugely important to these plains people that lived in the Alberta plains. Next, we're going to talk about hunting buffalo. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a buffalo before. They're huge animals, and they have big horns. They're kind of scary, like they're really big. So these First Nations people were experts on hunting buffalo. Remember, back 12,000 years ago, they would not have had guns because they wouldn't have had gunpowder. So they hunted primarily using arrows, spears, knives, those sorts of things. So you can imagine that they wouldn't have been able to stand very far away, except unless they used a bow and arrow, but they couldn't just shoot the buffalo. It didn't exist. So they had to find other ways. Before the Europeans introduced guns to the First Nations people, the buffalo were hunted by hand and foot. So the First Nations people did eventually get guns, but that was only when the French and the English came to Canada and gave them guns. So they had no other way of killing the buffalo other than using their hands and their feet. The hunters would use spears and bows and arrows, like I said. The First Nations people had a very clever ways of hunting these animals. These people were so smart. The first one, they would use buffalo jumps. Buffalo would be chased over the edge of a cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, the injured animal would be killed. Buffalo runners would often dress in buffalo furs and intimidate a distressed buffalo. So they would basically run at these herds of buffalo and just basically run them off a cliff. It sounds awful, but it was so smart because they don't have to use their spears to kill them until they're at the bottom of the cliff. The next one was a buffalo pound. Just like with the buffalo jump, buffalo would be chased and directed to a specific area. The chase of a pound, there's two thes there, that's what got me. The case of a pound, this area would not be a cliff, but instead it was like a corral. Like they would chase a buffalo into an area that they couldn't get out of, and they would make it using wood. Once all these buffalo were trapped in the corral, it was so much easier to kill them. So they would chase a buffalo down a chute into into a corral, like a pound. And then the First Nations would be outside of the wood barricades, and they could easily kill the buffalo. The next one would be snowbanks. In the winter, some hunters would use snowshoes to easily move around. They would herd the buffalo into deep snowbanks where they could not move easily and thus be killed. So all of these ways are kind of similar. They trap the buffalo and then so that it's easier for them to kill, because it would be tough to run and run and run after to catch up to the buffalo. And most of these First Nations tribes wouldn't have had horses. Some of them did, but most of them wouldn't until the Europeans came over. So it would take a long time to run to catch these buffalo. So imagine they're just on their feet running after these buffalo, chasing them into the snowbanks, and they would probably be in the winter, they're on snowshoes, so they can stand on top of the snow, whereas the heavy buffalo would sink down. And you know how hard it is to run in snow. You guys have all tried it. So imagine a giant buffalo trying to sink lower and lower into the snow and trying to run away, but they can't, so they get killed. The last one is a water hole. The buffalo would be followed to water holes. So remember, the First Nations tribes are are following the buffalo. So they would go and find out where their water hole was. The hunters would attack when they went to get a drink, and since the buffalo would often struggle in the mud, they would be able to get them pretty easily, because you guys know how hard also it is to run in mud and water. So all these four ways sound pretty brutal, but they were very intelligent ways that the First Nations peoples could kill buffalo to use for all of these amazing resources. Next, we're going to learn about Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. It's kind of a funny name, but it is a real place in Alberta that you can visit. It's kind of by Lethbridge and Fort Macleod. So this is a buffalo jump located near Fort Macleod in southern Alberta. It's an example of a buffalo jump that was used by the Plains Blackfoot people to hunt buffalo. So the Piikani, the Kainai, those people would use Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump to hunt their buffalo. Here, buffalo, so they would be on the top, the front, the flat land, and buffalo runners would dress up as wolves or coyotes. They would use hides or pelts from the coyotes and the wolves to drive the buffalo over the cliff. So you can imagine a person dressed up in a wolf skin or a coyote skin, and they would run at the buffalo and chase them, and the buffalo would get scared and they would run over the cliff. And basically they would hit the bottom. Either they would be hurt really, really bad, or they would be instantly killed. If they were just hurt, then the First Nations people could kill them easily because they couldn't move. Once killed at the bottom, the carcass would be processed at a nearby camp while still fresh. So they would bring the buffalo to their camp, and they would get all of the things they needed from the buffalo for themselves. So I'm going to have you, once you're done this video, I'd like you to go and watch the video about Head Smash In Buffalo Jump. Once you're done that, write one fact on your sheet about that, or that you learned. It could be something really interesting that you learned, something that you thought was gross or weird, but remember, it isn't gross. It's how they lived, and it was really, really smart. So please write something that interested you or that you never had heard of before. And then once you're done that, you're going to finish a boom card about the last 3 lessons that we've done. I just want to check to make sure you're understanding. So go back in your notes, take a little look, remind yourself of the different First Nations tribes and the parts of the buffalo that could be used. And I'm going to have you do a boom card. Once you're done that, we are going to learn some different languages. I'm really excited for the next lesson. You guys are going to love it. So I will see you later. Please do a good job of both your interesting fact and your boom card. Thank you guys. Bye.